Ok, estamos ao vivo.
Good morning and welcome to the first panel of the second day of the 5th Brics Conference. After a first day full of insights and great debates, we open today's event with a very important issue: women leadership in Brics. Joining us in this roundtable is Karabo Mohale, Deputy Chairperson of the South African Brics Youth Association, Amna Mirza, Assistant Professor of Political Studies at the SPM College from the University of Delhi, Gabriella Oliveira, PhD in International Law from the University of São Paulo, and Victoria Panova, Vice President for International Relations of the Far East Federal University in Russia. Before we start, I would like to remind you that this conference will take place until Friday, the 29th of October, and you can see the full schedule in the link at the description of this video. Also in the description, you will find a presence list. If you want to receive an official certificate from the 5th Brics Conference, don't forget to fill it in. Finally, if you wish to ask questions to the speakers, there is also a Google form for that in the description of the video. If the links are not yet there, please press F5 to refresh the page. In the name of Brics and Professor Casella, I would like to take advantage of this opportunity to thank our sponsors, since this conference will not be possible without them. I would also like to thank all of you for your presence. I will now present our first speaker. Dr. Panova is the Vice President of International Relations of the Far East Federal University and advisor to the Director of the Russian Institute for Strategic Studies. During the Russian chairmanship in Brics in 2020, she also held the post of the Scientific Supervisor of the Brics Expert Council and Managing Director of the National Committee of the Brics Research. Dr. Panova, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Priscila. It's really great to be here with you. I'm sorry to be only part of the conference, but I believe the issue that you decided to raise within this conference is really important, and that is why I'd like to really thank University of São Paulo and you personally for moderating this session. So let me talk a bit about their actual points of what Brics has achieved so far, and also then talk a bit about obstacles. So it is true that Brics is a prominent example of alliance. It's not an alliance, of course. It's a gathering of like-minded countries who are united by approaches that are common to the world, to the visions of their inclusive world, to the visions of being social responsible economies. And our countries have always attached great importance to ensuring the inclusiveness of its communities and meeting the needs of the citizens. There are different progress in this in each of our countries, and each of our countries have started with different, let's say, positions in this regard. I can proudly say that Russia, being the successor of the Soviet Union, was one of the first to introduce legal rights and equal rights for women. In terms of legislation, it was one of the first in the world to have a comprehensive understanding, comprehensive covering of women's equal issues. And that is why it's not a surprise that last year, when we held our presidency in Brics, we could name a number of achievements in this regard. First of all, you've mentioned that I headed the Brics Expert Council, and one thing I need to say that being part of the Brics Expert Council was the Russian entity, but we worked together with our BTTC colleagues, Brics Think Tank Council, and it was together with them that we designed a first of its kind overarching study, a toolkit, Women Economic Empowerment in Brics, Policies, Achievements, Challenges, and Solutions. This thorough study addressed the current situation with women in BRICS countries, highlighting existing weak spots in political, social, economic terms, outlined expert recommendations and way to promote gender equality within this association. So I think we should not be stopping with this particular study. And when we talk about further research, it should be done, and probably other countries would be great if could take this over and continue the study and probably expand it and deepen it further. We'll definitely be always happy to join in. BRICS Civil Forum, which was held in September, it also resulted in a set of expert recommendations. And among the others, we had one of the 8 working groups was devoted to women and girls agenda. And in a forum statement, a necessity to expand the representation of women in administrative institutions was highlighted, and also was followed by proposal of created international crisis management group with an equal participation of men and women in empowering women's rights organizations to enhance protection of women from violence and abuse of rights. As we know today, if we take conflicts and crises all over the world, there are only 13 or 14% of women that are negotiators. And meanwhile, we know that according to the studies, about 64% more chances of success are in cases where women negotiators were involved. So this agreement where women were involved is likely to stay in power and to result in actual outcomes, and peace process is there. Another point, under the Russian chairmanship, we also had launch of Women Business Alliance. It was several years of preparatory work. In fact, this particular initiative was born from the Eurasian Women Forum. It's one more instance. We just had it 2 weeks ago, held in St. Petersburg, Russia. It is organized and promoted by Valentina Matvienko, the Speaker of the Council of Federation of the it's an upper chamber of parliament in Russia. And this is in fact one of a very vivid example of Russia's achievement in this regard, because head of their upper chamber is number 3 in the state. So it's, and this is a woman. So in fact, we had a number of, during this forum, I'll jump over there just for a few minutes. We had lots of sessions held, all of them devoted to different areas of women's rights, women's participation issues. And we had a number of interesting initiatives. And what we know is that if it was launched there, it will have support not only from Russian authorities or Russian parliamentarians, but also have a wider effect in Eurasia, but also beyond, because, for example, we had a number of speakers of parliament from Latin America, and it's also it is seen as a very important event. One of such initiatives is the new platform that is created on the basis of Eurasian Women Forum, and this is the platform for EAWF and Women 20 participation. One more thing, why I talk about Women 20 is that I'm Sherpa of Russia in the Women 20. It means official representative. And that said, being part of this process since its inception in 2015, I could see that what we need to do more is we need to have BRICS women more united and discussing more issues of common prominence, of common concern within this forum. So Women 20 could be also another platform for BRICS women to consolidate and see where else they could be having more impact, not just launching Women Business Alliance, right? But seeing how women scientists, women in education, women in politics, in diplomacy, et cetera, could be finding new common grounds in order to foster their participation. So this is also extremely important. it is also interesting. One thing I have to mention is that COVID-19 was demonstrated vividly that women were, first of all, those who had to hold the biggest burden because they had to, not only the majority of health workers are women, especially those in their kind of rank and file. But women also, besides taking their social responsibilities, their professional responsibilities, also had to continue doing work within the situation of lockdowns, of taking care of their elderly, of their children, of their those who were in need in their family. And this was done at the same time with their professional responsibilities. So that is why we could say that COVID-19 have had greater influence on women. And we could also cite that if we look at the countries that are led by women, we could see that policies there during COVID-19 were taken more, let's say, humanistic, more people-oriented, and probably that brought somewhat better results in certain areas when fighting the pandemic. If we go to, since one of the best initiatives was Women Business Alliance, I should say that one of the areas that we need to look into is the development of women entrepreneurship. And it's one of the most prominent drivers because our economists, especially in the times of fourth industrial revolution and digital revolution, we understand that economy is led not only by big industrial giants, but it's also small and medium businesses that are there to give blood and to give real drive to our economies. And that is why it's really important within entrepreneurship to offer women greater role. It was counted that if we involve on an equal gender basis women into the business activities, by 2025 it could add up to 26% of GDP globally. So this is something we have to understand and to keep in mind. It is also clear that women, if we look at socially oriented businesses, it is also interesting to see that in general, it's about less than a quarter, but if social responsible business, it's over 3/4 that are held by women. So in our difficult times and the times when we need to overcome pandemics, women are more eager to take up positions and to take up activities that are needed for our societies to overcome such situation. And thus, there's obviously a need for Brics' collective commitment to women economic empowerment, especially taken that if we look at Brics indices, they are ranked lower than globally in this regard. Of course, each of our countries have their own national strategy. When we talk about Russia, there is National Action Strategy for Women for 2017-2022. It is active to improve women's status in society, but obviously more needs to be done, and we need to, each of us need to take extra activities with regards to current situation. We also see that there is low participation of women in politics generally, and Brics countries are not in the forefront altogether in this regard. And what we could do, we could be doing each on our level all possible in order to overcome this situation. Obviously, when we talk about universities, and I could cite you the case of FAFU, we've been doing over the past years extra efforts in order to ensure better participation of girls in STEM, not just in humanitarian activities, and also more women were involved in their managerial and administrative positions in FEFU. It's about 22% of women, but of course we need more, but it's still a very good share if we talk about university leadership. We promoted a special internship last year for Brics. It was not specifically designed for women, but we had a large number of girls coming from all the Brics countries to study at those 5 programs in FEFU. And I can tell you that ladies were among the most active and most successful when reaching the final results and offering final projects to us. So I think this was a very good experiment. One more thing I need to, I will have to wrap up soon, but in addition, I want to add one more thing. I kept saying it last year, and I think we still didn't achieve this. We need a gender disaggregated data. And this is on all levels. This is in BRICS countries, but also globally. This is something we still lack. And without this scientifically proven, verifiable data, we would not be able to take decisions that are actually needed for women in our societies. And that is why I think such studies and cooperation with statistical agencies of BRICS is also of utmost importance. So universities plus government statistical agencies would be a good multi-stakeholder approach to offer new perspectives for gender equality. I will stop here, but I will be happy to listen to the rest of to all the other speakers later on, and I'm wishing you a great discussion. Thank you so much, Priscila.
Thank you very much, Dr. Panova. So she brought here a lot of content, really. She mentioned the leadership of Russia concerning legal rights to women, and this actually reflected in the Russian presidency in BRICS, and that Russia brought a lot of new actions to include more women in BRICS bloc, such as in the economic sector, but we still have a lot to do. We have issues regarding representativity in politics, internationally and nationally, and in important management positions. And one solution will be more data focusing on gender to improve decision-making regarding women participation in society. This was very interesting. Thank you, Dr. Panova. So continue with our program. We will now hear from our second speaker, Karabo Mohale, who is a deputy chairperson of the South African BRICS Youth Association. She's currently enrolled for a Master in Development Studies at the University of Sussex in England, and served as the board chair of the Thyssen Institute for Continuing Education. She's a marketer by profession and have extensive experience in the financial sector, banking, insurance, and in government. Karabo Mohale, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, moderator, for that welcome. Let me greet my fellow esteemed panelists. I was even saying to friends yesterday that as a young person, I'm extremely nervous because, you know, you've got these big towering figures who are women, you know, that are going to be having such critical discussions. And I think I should just appreciate the University of Sao Paulo, you know, for bringing us together as women. And I'm quite passionate, actually, that it is an intergenerational dialogue, that you have women from different generations opining on some of the critical issues that face women, you know, in their respective countries, as globally, you know. And I think for me, this conversation is quite important, it's very critical, because a fight for equality must never stop. You know, it must continue consistently, we must be deliberate, we must be intentional about how we go about it. But also we must also be considerate in how we shape women. You know, I always say that we must never fall into a trap of having only women discussing women issues. We must tap into the STEM. I think the previous speaker spoke about it, that we must be intentional in getting young women to enter into STEM fields and to have engagements around those particular critical areas, because they then shape how women, are positioned, how women are seen, and really changing the patriarchal narrative that is there in society that tends to say that women must only be in humanities, they can't be in STEM fields, they can't be in technical conversations. I think this conversation for me as well really must encourage and really challenge us to form a blueprint around how we're going to build intersectional communities. I know that there are quite a lot of topics, even in South Africa as well, that are also quite contentious. I mean, when you speak about the rights of the LGBTQI plus community, it is also a contentious issue. But I think we need to make a concerted effort to speak about their rights, because they too are humans, and they too must be able to participate, in all social spheres. And it becomes our responsibility, as activists, as agitators of some form of social change, to speak about the rights of the LGBTQI plus community, to speak about the rights of the marginalized and also persons living with disability. And I think it is for us to really actively seek, different ways and different initiatives that we can be able to put in place to really change some of these anomalies in society, because I think, for more often than not, we don't speak about it, and become so normalized, especially, when you're discussing the exclusion of women. There are so many nuances in that we're also so deaf to, when we're speaking about representation, and you're looking at the leaders of states, whether in Brics countries, whether in Africa. I think in Africa, we've got 3 or 2 women who are presidents, that for generations to come creates a very, negative narrative about the superiority of men in such critical positions. And we need to start to find ways to challenge some of these anomalies. We need to have women that are leading, as presidents. I mean, there must be a day when we wake up in the near future where all presidents of Brics countries are women, and it should not be a shocking, new phenomenon. It should be something that is internalized in society. It should be something that is institutionalized. Because some of these, inequalities that come about because of this type of injustice that comes with positionality and how women are viewed in society. If you don't have that type of psychological warfare in how we position women, we might really be doing an injustice, to some of the strides that we want to achieve as women, globally. I mean, you look at South Africa, for example. We've got a quota system of 50-50, but even in that quota system, we have struggled. I mean, for the longest of years, South Africa has never had a woman who's either, president, we've never had it. And for me, it becomes very problematic that even in the quota system that we're having, we're not creating conducive environments, that enable women to thrive, that enable women to participate, more often than not, especially as young women who are coming up, in our careers. We often have to choose between either being mothers or being career women, while our husband, our fiancés, our boyfriends who impregnate us do not have the same struggle that we have, but yet they are parents as well. I mean, even when you look at some of the laws that are there, I mean, when it comes to maternity leave and pay when you're on maternity leave, in South Africa, you've got unpaid maternity leave. I mean, that type of struggle for me is also quite contentious, because what are we saying to women? Must they choose? Must you choose between being a mother, and having some form of career? Why can't you have both? Why can't you have a system that works for the benefit of women? I think some of these conversations, as we begin to have them, we start to unearth some of these problematic issues that I think we then, shed light to, we raise the curtain on them, and we really start to say, what is the change that we would want to see happening in our societies, in our immediate economic spaces. It really is. I think the previous speaker also mentioned is that it is common cause that, whether political, social, economic space, by and large are very patriarchal, and are very exclusionary. And even when you look at the leadership structures, when they speak about inclusivity, it's women at literally the bottom, of the ladder. And the higher you go, you get more men and more men. And when you start challenging it, they then just pick one woman and they put her on top. And then they start saying, no, but you said you want inclusivity. There is the inclusivity that you're talking about. And we're saying that is not the type of inclusivity we're speaking about, because it creates an impression that women are incapacitated. And that is not true, because women, like their male counterparts, have contributed to, liberation struggles, have contributed to the development trajectory in their various spaces. And they too need to be given the due accolade that is accorded to them. It's got nothing to do with someone doing us a favor. Women deserve those positions, and women deserve the accolade. I mean, even when you look at how we position women, whether you look at continents, whether you look at countries, when you look at towering figures in whatever space. I mean, you go to Africa, you think Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso, you think Jomo Kenyatta, you think Nelson Mandela. You really never think about Miriam Makeba. You never think about Winnie Mandela. These women become just mere annexures to history, while they were in the forefront of driving a form of change for equality. And I think we need to start even speaking, names of these women. When you go to Russia, it should not be, a shocking thing that you want to speak about Alexandra Kollontai and some of the work that she would have done, and whatever contribution it is that she would have made. I mean, when you speak about Marxist theory today, you can't not speak about Alexandra Kollontai, the contribution that she would have made to that type of theory. You cannot speak about Rosa Luxemburg, So I think we need to get to a point where, and I think academics call it epistemic injustice, we need to get to a point where we start speaking about some of these successes of women. We start correcting the incorrect narratives that are there in knowledge consumption, that are there even in how we engage, and even in how women are being positioned in society, women are being positioned even in history, because it becomes important for generations to come. A young woman must not think that she's the first Clara Zetkin, She must not think that she's the first to achieve something. She must be able to believe that there were pioneering women before her that have done extraordinary things in the most severe and most difficult of circumstances, but yet they were able to triumph. And the minute we start speaking about some of these positive stories, it gives courage to even the younger generation to want to even achieve so much more. Because when you think about the conditions that these former towering women would have achieved in very difficult times, when you're looking at yourself today, you've got certain freedoms, you've got access to the internet, you literally live some form of free life. And that says to you, look, whatever it is that they were able to achieve, actually, you do not have an excuse but not to achieve way much more than they did, because you do not face as many obstacles as they did. Although there are still obstacles that need, that need to be looked into, and that need to be resolved. But I think it's worth mentioning that the more we have conversations about these towering figures, I think the more we can be able to do some form of psychological transformation, as well as taking it into how our societies are set up about. I think the fight for representation in all spheres is very important. And representation matters. And I don't think that we can be able to echo it enough, And as I'm about to conclude, Program Director, I think one thing that we must also always remember is that the fight that we want to wage is going to require us to be very radical and militant. The time for us being very conventional about the rights of women, the time of us, speaking silently and giving names to, pedophilia and saying it's child marriages, and trying to give it fancy names must really come to an end. I mean, we must call out pedophilia for what it is. There's no such a thing as child marriages, rape is rape. There's no such a thing as sex with a minor. I think these types of euphemisms that we want to use to make societal anomalies acceptable will really require us to get out of our comfortable seats and really start to challenge some of these things and speak out against them and say, and hold even governments accountable. Whether it's human trafficking, whether it is gender-based violence, we need to hold our governments accountable, because the biggest thing about speaking about the leadership of women is understanding that women need a solid base of support. And if they don't have that solid base of support that is going to come from these other young women, they are bound to fail, because the system was not designed to carry women. And those that are in charge, have no interest in tilting the power dynamics. And it becomes our responsibility as women who have got access to spaces of influence, who have got access, to information, to ensure that we build these solid bases that when women come up, they're able to have some form of support. And we know that we can be able to protect them, from the wiles of patriarchy, and how they are often, more often than not written out of history books, and their contributions are so watered down. And, they're never given the due accolade that I think that they deserve. So I think it's important for us to open up access to the economy. We need to be intentional about it. I think quotas are also important, but we need to also, in the process of putting up quotas, ensure that we create conducive environments for women to participate. We must find creative and intentional ways to locate women at the center of policy development, because the minute women are not there, these policies are not gendered. It's only after a promulgation of a particular policy when you look at it and you're saying, no, but this is not gendered. This does not take into consideration the socio-economic conditions that women face. And I think we also need to be able to center them, in as so far as development activity is concerned, because I strongly believe that development is an equalizer, education is an equalizer, and access is an equalizer. And as and when we're speaking to inclusivity politics, I think we need to make that intentional effort to ensure that we open up space and we create conducive environments for the participation of women and for them to be able to thrive. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Karabo Mohale, for this very inspiring speech. And I totally agree with you. We must fight for equality, and this will never stop. And we should really seek to change the right of minorities, not only women. And I was really shocked to know that even though South Africa have a 50% quota, this actually did not create an environment that gives incentives to women to engage in this kind of activity. This was actually very surprising to me, but it does make sense that until today, and I speak for myself because in Brazil is basically the same, that women still have to make the choice, career or motherhood. And that is sad because this does not apply for men. Well, as you mentioned, the absence of women in positions of power is a huge problem, as Dr. Panova also mentioned and noticed, but I'm glad to know that you gave us some solutions, that dialogue and support for women are essential to change our society. And this is actually happening. Look at us here, right? In representation and education, I totally agree with you. They are equalizers. And now going for our third speaker of the night that will add to all these comments, these great comments we had already, is Dr. Amna Mirza. Dr. Mirza is an alumni of the Delhi Public School from St. Stephen's College, Hindu College, and also the University of Delhi. She is currently Assistant Professor of Political Studies at SPM College from the University of Delhi. She is recipient of a lot of awards, including the Godfrey Phillips Golden Ovary Award, St. Stephen's College Centenary Medal for Character Combined with Learning, Bharat Nirman Award for Women Entrepreneurship, Mukh Naja National Award, and the Business Ranker Women Achievement Award. She has 7 books to her credit and 30 research papers. Dr. Amna, you have the floor.
Hi, am I audible now?
Yes.
All right.
Greetings to everyone. I am Dr. Amna. I teach political science at Shama Prasad Mukherjee College for Women, University of Delhi. As we begin our deliberation at the USP Brics conference on the very important topic of cooperation and consensus in the rearrangement of global relations, my gratitude to the organizers, all the partners, all the supporters, and all for inviting me for this very special session on women leadership in Brics. My greetings to our fellow distinguished panelists, Oliveira, Karabo, Mohale, Victoria, Panova, and our moderator, Priscila, Cottarelli. Once again, greetings to everyone. It is indeed a matter of great delight for me to be here for the conference. Today, I'll be deliberating on feminist perspectives in international relations and reform of global governance realms in order to put forward my views for the issue that is women leadership in Brics, looking at the increasing role of women leadership in Brics countries. Dear friends, my talk is divided over 3 parts. In the first part, we shall try to understand the feminist approach in international relations, followed by we shall be trying to use the perspectives from the theoretical realms, the crutches from the theoretical realms, and reflect on the contemporary scenario from Brics countries. And then in the third part, we shall look at reform of world governance mechanism, wherein we'll try to situate it within the bigger question of solution for women concerns. In the first part, we deliberate on understanding the feminist approach in international relations. We all know that international relations has been a discipline that has been marked by the very special emphasis towards power, looking at national interest. Now, when we try to understand feminist perspective, the feminist voices, when we reflect on various works by reputed scholars and academia in the realm of feminism, they question, they problematize women absence from traditional international relations theory, as well as looking at the bigger picture of practical issues also. The feminist scholarship has tried to deconstruct gender. That is, biologically, we all agree that women are different from that of from men. But however, gender as a socially constructed identity is used to explain that how the realm of international relations it works in a manner which leads to ignoring the feminist voices. Gender is used as a variable to explain and elaborate the bigger aspect of power relations. Now, when we talk about feminism in international relations, I'm sure you're all aware about the work of Christine Sylvester, that is Feminist International Relations, an Unfinished Journey, the very significant work of J. Ann Tickner, Gender in International Relations, Feminist Perspectives on Achieving Global Security, Cynthia Enlow's work, Bananas, Beaches, and Bases, Making Feminist Sense of International Relations. Now, in all these works, there is a very important concern, that is situating women perspective and issues in the realm of international relations, trying to highlight women's absence from decision making and institutional structures, and above all, trying to present that how power, national interest has been used as concepts, have been worked out as concepts with have male bias. The feminist scholarship in international relations, therefore, tries to challenge the mainstream perspective, that is the realist perspective on issues like security, power, national interest, that is how the realism presents top-down, state-centered perspective wherein it tries to conceal concerns and the issues of marginalization and exploitation of women. The feminist perspective challenges the narrative. It tries to put forward that how gender dichotomies, like when we try to analyze international relations as rational versus emotional, public versus private, global versus local, in all this, the narrative, the mainstream narrative of international relations tries to conceal issues which lead to marginalization, subordination, and exploitation of women. When we try to understand feminism like any other discipline, from literature to philosophy to sociology, feminism is a vast paradigm. Similarly, in international relations also, feminist scholarships is the work in feminist scholarship is varied, from liberal feminists to Marxist feminists to postmodern feminists, but a common strand that really unites all the feminist voices, concerns, scholarship in the realm of IR, that is how it points out that the realists have led to partial, one-sided explanation of the discipline. And the reason for that is how assumptions that have guided the epistemology, namely focus on human nature, understanding of power, national interest, has been based on male perspective. Further, the feminist scholarship, though diverse in international relations, it points out that there is relative lack of feminist perspective within the discipline. And above all, it makes an attempt to add an inclusive approach in the understanding of international relations, focusing on that how, without due attention to feminist perspective, there shall be an incomplete picture of reality. Now, using these broad theoretical arguments, we now move towards the second part of my deliberation, wherein we'll try to present reflections from the contemporary scenario with reference to the bigger question of women leadership from Brics nations. Dear friends, Brics is an acronym for the grouping of world's leading emerging economies. We all know Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. In 2001, the British economist Jean O'Neill coined the term BRICS to describe the four emerging economies in 2001. And in 2006, the grouping was formalized during the first meeting of BRICS foreign ministers. Later, South Africa was invited to join BRICS in December 2010. Now, with these important facts from the world polity, it is very essential for us to understand that BRICS brings together 5 of world's largest developing countries and it represents, if you go by some data, taking inputs from some data, represents 41% of the global population, 24% of the global GDP, 16% of the global trade. Now, as I try to understand this very important place that Brics countries occupy in the world apparatus, let us now look at some important data, because I believe that any argument that we make must be backed by data in order to elaborate further on the research and findings. So, dear friends, I'll be looking at the Global Gender Gap Report, which is, as we all know, the World Economic Forum published first Gender Gap Index in 2006. The Global Gender Gap Index benchmarks countries on progress towards gender parity in 4 dimensions, which are economic participation and opportunity, educational attainment, health and survival, political empowerment. Now, with these aspects into mind, we now take reference to the contemporary reports, and by contemporary time reference, we mean the 2020 report and 2021 report. Now, these years again become very significant for us, as we all know that 2020 and 21, the 2 significant years wherein the world was disrupted because of the COVID pandemic. We all know that how one virus led to rearrangement of entire mechanisms from domestic to the global. We found that we were living in a world wherein our health as well as our economy were, new ideas that we had to deliberate on with respect to the question of security. Having said so, the 2020 Global Gender Gap Index, the report has some very startling facts, and we quote that for you. Largest gender disparity that is there in the political empowerment, that is only 25% of the 127 seats in parliaments around the world are occupied by women. And to add to that, only 21% of 3,343 ministers are women. To add to that, some important findings that we take for data reference from Global Gender Gaps Index 2021 reports. Herein, I'd like to draw your attention towards the region-wise ranking. That is, South Asia, incidentally, if you go by the inputs from the report, is one of the world's worst performing regions, followed by Middle East and the Northern Africa. And that the largest gender gap is there in political empowerment. The gender gap in political empowerment remains the largest. Women represent only 26.1% of some 35,500 parliament seats and just 22.6% of over 3,400 ministers worldwide. Now, this data becomes very essential because if we look at some of the important data that we get from the International Monetary Fund, and you can see on the screen that is, this data says that when we look at the time framework of 2016 to 2021, the Brics nation will have accounted for about half of the world growth. But when we try to look at from the bigger picture of women representation and issues of gender parity, Brics nations countries as a group are underperforming against the global average on gender equality. Now, why then this data really matters, or what does this picture really tell us? It definitely tells us that BRIC countries no doubt have a very important place in world governance. And to add to that, one cannot also ignore that with reference to issues of women, from representation to economic avenues, there are concerns. Now, why women participation matters? To answer this question, let me draw your attention towards the remarks that we got from this very significant report from MoscowTimes.com, the remarks of Klaus Schwab, the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, that we have to understand that we're living in a world that is defined by new challenges. Today in the global realms, our challenges are just not military. Our challenges are that our security threats cut across borders. In this new context, wherein the world we just saw oscillated between globalization in the post-Cold War era, followed by the rise of populism in the contemporary times, the need to re-globalize. In this aspect, the rise of new industrial economic models like Industry 4.0, the narrative of globalization 4.0, in all of it, we know that we need to work on inclusion. Because, once again, quoting from the report, without equal inclusion of half of the world's talent, we will not be able to deliver on the promise of the fourth industrial revolution for all of society grow. And above all, this inclusion is also very significant for the attainment of United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now, having said so that yes, progress has been made with reference to women representation. Yes, the BRICS countries are going to play an important role. And yes, in the same framework, one cannot ignore the issue of women disparity too. So looking at these paradoxes, where does the solution lie? Dear friends, for that, in the final part of my talk, I present you the bigger question and the aspect of reform of world governance mechanism. That is the solution for women concerns with not only which has a bearing for BRICS countries and women representation in BRICS countries, but when we look at a general framework, it has an important bearing with reference for the world polity also. We all know that the world is interconnected today like never before. Today, technology has connected our lives from domestic to international. We're living at a time where this technology in itself is being redefined and disrupted every time. Now, BRICS, as we all know, it gets together 5 of the largest developing countries of the world, having representing 41% of global population, 24% of global GDP, some of the very well important facts that we get from important research. Now, I'd like to draw your attention towards the recently concluded BRICS Summit. India is the chair for BRICS with reference to the year 2021. In the recently concluded BRICS Summit, at the Delhi Declaration, the declaration called for reform of the principal organs of United Nations, including that of United Nations Security Council. It is for the first time, this is very significant, again, that BRICS has taken a collective position on strengthening and reforming multilateral systems. Now, why this becomes essential? That is, when we try to understand women concerns in international relations, we all know that right from the level of theory to practice, there has been concern, namely of inadequate women representation, not having being given due space to women concerns. No doubt BRICS countries have made progress with reference to issues concerning women from political to economic, but at the same time, looking at the new complexities that surround world governance, one cannot ignore that the attention paid to women concern is not adequate. Seen in this regard, India's call for reforming globalization at various junctures, in my mind, can be a very important policy framework, not only to reform global governance, but also to cater to international relations, which are more inclusive of women voices. To say that one must just roll off globalization because it led to more losses would be wrong. Because globalization indeed presented to us opportunities, but at the same time, yes, we cannot ignore the problematic aspect that it led to losses also. What is essential here is that we need a new narrative to guide global governance, the narrative that places humans over profits, as India has given the call for reforming globalization at virtual summit of G20, at United Nations summit, at several times. So, in the same way, the Delhi Declaration of the BRICS Summit must be reread. That is, there is a need to strengthen and reform the multilateral system. IR theory from realist to a later lens somewhere also led to ignorance of feminist perspective. The need of the hour is to have a much inclusive approach which must give emphasis to human welfare, which also must take into account the concerns of women, because it is essential to have a comprehensive outlook towards national interests as well as to situate global governance that leads to empowerment of everyone. Once again, my gratitude to all the organizers, the partners and supporters of the USP BRICS conference on the significant issue of cooperation and consensus in the rearrangement of global relations. I thank the organizers for giving me the time, and I rest my case with the final concluding remark, that is, international relations theory worked on one-sided aspect wherein the assumptions led to male bias. The need of the hour is to rectify this theory, and feminist scholarship did show us what an inclusive approach in IR can mean. Taking the spirit of reforming globalization and the later Delhi Declaration of the BRICS Summit, the need of the hour is to have global realms much more inclusive and reform with more space and say for feminist concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amna, for this enlightening presentation. You gave us several instruments to understand women's situation in international relations and thus in BRICS. Feminist perspective in international relations should be more present in our daily lives. We must hear more feminist voices if we want to create this complete picture of international relations. Actually, what was really shocking for me was the data you brought about gender disparity, especially about the disparity in political empowerment. Gladly, you presented us some solutions, and we have seen some progress in this field, but we still have a large way to go. And actually, this is a great hook to Dr. Werner's presentation. She will be speaking about violence against women in Brazilian politics. So going to our last finalist, we have Dr. Gabriella Werner. She is a PhD in international law from the University of São Paulo. Also, she is a professor, a lawyer, and she acted before the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals. Dr. Gabriela, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm
Yes.
gonna share my screen. So you can see my screen now? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, and I guess good afternoon or good evening. It has been such a pleasure listening to these amazing women here today. I am truly honored to be part of this conference, and I want to thank you, the Brics, and all the organizers for the invitation and for giving me this opportunity. Priscila, congrats and thank you for the great work mediating this panel today. Well, we cannot think the rearrangement of global relations without addressing women leadership. I had to think a lot before deciding the main focus of my lecture today. I study international criminal law. I don't study as much BRICS, and I want to share a Brazilian situation with you so we can discuss it on other BRICS countries. In the last 2 years, the coronavirus pandemic has affected our lives in ways we could never imagine. But in Brazil, the last 8 years staged so many shifts. We are facing not only a sanitary crisis, but an economic and social and political one. We know that in any given crisis, the rights of women are more affected due to the gender gap that becomes even more visible. Minorities and vulnerable groups always resisted the attempt to make their claims silenced. Since the advent of mass media and now social media, these voices are no longer isolated. We are here today. We're here together. We have seen the rise of women movements against gender oppression in different social contexts, and we cannot ignore the key role of NGOs, grassroots organizations, and intergovernmental bodies and instruments. And in this sense, female leadership is vital to press for change and progressive evolutions, both from private and public realms. This being said, I want to analyze political violence against women in Brazil, restricting it to the elective mandates in the legislative and executive powers as a means of methodological cutout, once the concept of political life is much broader, also including the private spheres. Currently, only 15% of the members of both the House of Representatives and the Senate are women. And in all history, Brazil has had only one female president, Dilma Rousseff, between the years of 2011 to 2016. As we can see, our rate is below the worldwide rate we have seen in Dr. Enya's presentation. As to what refers to Black, Indigenous, and transgender women, this number is even lower. But political underrepresentation is just one piece of this problem. In order to illustrate the political violence women suffer every day, I'll talk about 5 different cases, and I will introduce you to 5 amazing politicians in Brazil. The first one concerns Dilma Rousseff. During her mandate as president of our country, she suffered several attacks, ranging from her appearance to her intelligence and ability to rule. Some people even put stickers of Dilma with her legs spread on the fuel tank of their cars as a misogynistic way of protesting the prices of gas. She ended up impeached during her second mandate. It is important to highlight that during the impeachment procedure, our current president, Jair Bolsonaro, was deputy in the House of Representatives, and in his vote, he exhorted the notorious torturer of the Brazilian military dictatorship, General Ustra, the same man responsible for the torture of Dilma Rousseff in that same period. Now, under Bolsonaro's government, gas prices are much, much, much higher, and we don't see this kind of stickers in cars. The second case is about Marielle Franco, a bisexual Black female municipal councilor in Rio de Janeiro, raised in a community of the complex of Maré. She fought for human rights, for the ending of racial and gender violence, against the abuse of power and police violence on the communities. She was a true leader, and she was killed in March 2018. Her death is linked to the militias, but to this day, we don't know who ordered the assassination. Here we can see a photo that illustrates that political violence does not end when we are killed. The man on the left, wearing a yellow t-shirt, is Federal Deputy Daniel Silveira. At the time of this photo, he was a candidate to the seat. He shattered a kind of street sign in tribute to Marielle Franco. He is now in prison, awaiting trial for other types of crimes, and he still holds his seat on the House of Representatives. The third case concerns the Manuela Davila, an experienced politician who was candidate to the vice presidency of Brazil in 2018 and recently disputed mayor election in Porto Alegre. She was the target of horrific fake news, and her 5-year-old daughter was threatened with rape. The threat with sexual violence seems to be a pattern. So yes, we should call things by its name. Rape is rape. Sexual violence is sexual violence. Political violence is political violence. It's not freedom of speech. The fourth case. On December 2020, State Deputy of São Paulo, Isa Pena, during a parliamentary session, had her breast palpated by another state deputy who came from behind her while she was talking to the session's president. All of this in public and caught on camera. Here we can see the exact moment that this crime occurred. He was suspended for 6 months, but he still holds his seat. Recently, during a session of the Parliamentary Inquiry Commission established by the Senate to investigate actions and omissions of the federal government during the pandemic, Senator Simone Tebet was called totally uncontrolled by a government minister who was testifying that day. She was simply doing her job, as were the male senators. By the way, none of the members of this commission is female. Nonetheless, the female bench, which was established in March 2021 this year, formed by female senators from different political spectrums, demanded participation, even as non-members. Their work was so fundamental for the investigation that Chapter 15 of the final report of the PIC makes recommendations and legislative propositions to ensure female participation on the commissions. These kinds of violence happen every day. In Latin America, the so-called Convention of Belém do Pará of 1994 provides for the prevention, punishment, and eradication of violence against women. In 2004, a follow-up mechanism was created. This mechanism highlighted the need to make progress in legislation that sanctions violence against women perpetrated in the public spheres and identified a growing concern over the prevention of achievement of full realization of women's political rights due to the acts of violence carried out in the political life. After discussions and agreements, a committee of experts elaborated an inter-American model law on the prevention, punishment, and eradication of violence against women in political life. This inter-American model law was adopted in October 2016. In Brazil, just yesterday, in August, the Congress approved the law 14,000 192. The first one to address political violence against women in Brazil. Article 3 states that any action, conduct, or omission with the purpose of preventing, hindering, or restricting the political rights of women is considered political violence against women. Likewise, acts of political violence against women include any distinction, exclusion, or restriction in the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise of their fundamental political rights and freedoms by virtue of their sex. Furthermore, this law provides for a specific crime consisting of harassing, embarrassing, humiliating, or threatening by any means a candidate for elective office or holder of an elective mandate using contempt or discrimination to the condition of a woman or to her color, race, or ethnicity in order to prevent or to hinder her election campaign or the performance of her elective term. The penalty is imprisonment up to 4 years and fine. In addition, the penalty for the crime of propagation of fake news about a candidate during the electoral period is increased by a third up to half if it involves contempt or discrimination to the status of a woman or to her color, race, or ethnicity. It is worth noting that this law does not cover discrimination on grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity. The law, as it stands, is clearly insufficient. Also recently, the Senate approved a bill that guarantees a minimum of 30% of the resources of the Special Fund for Campaigning Financing for Women's Proportional Candidacies and determines that at least 15% of the seats in the legislative power are filled by women. This bill will now be voted on in the House of Representatives. As we have seen, this 15% is the exact percentage we have right now. It is far from being enough. All these initiatives are welcome, although they are just the beginning. Beyond criminalization, we need to see how the law will be applied. We need the enhancement of public policies with control mechanisms and guarantees of protection. We need to understand that without eradicating political violence against women, we won't achieve political parity in democracy, because it affects the core of our political rights. It affects the realization of our political rights. Thus, besides numbers and quotas, a holistic approach is vital. Ultimately, ending political violence against women is a condition for a true democratic system. And this applies to Brazil, but to all other countries, including the Brics countries. We still live in a patriarchal society. There is no safe haven for women, but we will not back down. We will not be silenced. They tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds, and we are flourishing. Thank you so much for your attention. It has been a pleasure to share these thoughts with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Gabriela, for this very touching and eye-opening lecture. Ending this roundtable with real examples was a great way to illustrate the arguments presented by all speakers. Women need more representation. We need more support, and we need more protection. Moreover, we must talk more about women's role in society, in economy, universities, and in all imaginable areas one can think. Thank you very much for your speech. Before opening the floor to questions, I would like once again to thank all the speakers for accepting our invitation to be here today. You guys gave us a lot to think about. I'm sure that all the people that are watching us, they were really influenced and inspired by your ideas and speech. We now have about 10 to 15 minutes to questions. And the first one we received is addressed to Professor Karabo. And the question is, how do you believe the issue of intersectionality between gender and race should be addressed in the Brics? Professor Karabo, you have the floor to answer the question.
Thank you very much, and I apologize that my camera is off. I just arrived on campus because it's a school day for us. But I think the question of intersectionality between gender and race in particular, we need to be intentional. I think this is something that we've been, trying to emphasize throughout the presentation, that we need to be intentional in how we open up spaces for marginalized groups. And by this, we mean, when you have summits such as these, we need to be intentional on representation, on queer people, be intentional. I mean, if it means that we must go and headhunt, queer people that can be able to speak on particular subjects, I think we need to do that. Women, whether Black, Latina, let's be intentional, because if we're not intentional about opening up these spaces, then we will not bring about the change that we want to see in Brics countries in particular. Beyond that, I think we need to start institutionalizing quotas on race and gender. I know in South Africa, when it comes to the question of gender, there is a 50-50 quota. But even when it comes to race, because the reason why you have quota on gender is because you have an appreciation of the historical marginalization of women in particular. So even on the race question, I think we need to also implement quotas so that we're able to some extent, level the playing fields. Because if you don't bring about those types of policy interventions, to speak to these transformation imperatives, I don't think that we'll be able to bring about the type of change that we want to see in Brics countries in particular. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you. Now we received another question, and this is addressed to all speakers, is that in a world that is still dominated by men professionally, what do women can do to be noticed at our jobs? Dr. Gabriella Werner, do you want to start answering?
Yeah, I can start answering this. I think first we need to perceive that we are raised to be sweet, we are raised to please everyone, and we are raised to be insecure. If you don't do this, so we are always insufficient in this patriarchal society. So the first thing we need to do is strengthen our mental health. I think mental health is so important at this time. During the coronavirus, we saw that anxiety and depression affected more women than men because of so many pressures we face every day. So we have to perceive this, and we have to be strong, and we have to put ourselves out there. And it's so important to us women to, strength sorority between us. We need to help each other, because sometimes we are by ourselves. We women only have we women to count on. So we need to speak up. We need to don't be shy or afraid of not pleasing anyone. And we need to bound together to face this patriarchal and sexist professional environment.
Thank you, Dr. Werner. Professor Karabo and Dr. Amna, would you like to add something on that question?
I can come in. You know, when I saw the question, I just laughed alone that the mere fact that you're a woman doesn't matter, you know, how good you are at your job. The mere fact that you're a woman already gets you unnoticed. So essentially, by the virtue of, you know, whatever gender or sexuality or sexual orientation you have, there will still be those types of discriminations. But I think Gabriela put it so very well for us that we need to build, you know, communionship, you know, sisterhood amongst us, so that we're able to carry each other in the work that we do, because essentially there's nothing that you can really be able to do beyond doing your job, because what else would you want to do? I mean, if you go to work and do what you are contracted to do, what more can you possibly do for you to be, you know, given some form of recognition beyond the fact that you are good at your job? And what we always realize is that women have to work 2 times, 3 times more, but still are underpaid, still are undervalued. So I think it becomes important that indeed we build those systems of sisterhood, that even when, you know, women become managers, women become senior officials in the workspace, they are able to understand the struggles that women have, and therefore can be able to create more conducive spaces for women to be able to thrive in their day-to-day responsibilities.
Thank you. And now we have one last question. And for this, I ask the speakers to be very brief, like 1 minute answer. And the question is, BRICS countries have enacted several abortion legislation. In different cases, the woman is subject to re-victimization. In Brazil, for instance, a 10-year-old child raped by her uncle got pregnant. She had the legal right for an abortion, but had to change state to have the procedure. She was exposed online through social media. How can BRICS countries learn from each other and address this particular and cruel form of gender violence? As it is about Brazil, I think Dr. Werner can start.
Yeah, I can start. This was a terrible case. Brazil has prohibits abortion just with few exceptions, as in case of pregnancy by virtue of rape. And I don't know if we can learn from each other like in BRICS countries. I think we need to learn with countries that have already legalized abortion, such as here in Latin America, Argentina, recently Mexico. So we need to learn from and hear women's movements. We need to talk about healthcare. We need to talk about women's health. We need to talk about economic situations. So this law is so linked with moral and religious views than the things that really matters, because women will abort. This is a given fact. They will abort. The thing is, we want them to abort safely, or we want them to die. We are really wanting to protect lives, because if we are, we should turn abortion legal.
Dr. Amna or Professor Karabo, do you want to comment very briefly on this question?
Thank you very much. I know in South Africa, there has been some of reformation in it so far as abortion law is concerned, and termination of pregnancy now is permitted in the country. You can even get it for free at publicly funded hospitals. But I think beyond that, I think Gabriela put it quite well, that beyond everything, it's so more of a moral, cultural, and religious conversation that needs to take place. But I think as well, we need to start, agitating for policy reform, that enables women to have rights to reproductive, rights. I mean, it's about a person's right to exercise whatever decision it is that they want to exercise pertaining their own life. So I think it becomes important that we start having a policy reform conversation around how can we be able to agitate for that change, so that women in particular, because this goes to speak to the marginalization of women as well, because it's always women that have got many of these rights curtailed because of this or that other reason. So I think we need to start agitating for policy reform. Thank you.
Thank you very much for
Can
your
I add something very briefly?
Okay, less than 1 minute, please.
Yeah. Besides from making it legal to abort, we need to ensure access to abort. We have the case of Italy before the European Court of Human Rights, so we need to learn from it. Thank you.
Thank you for adding this very important case. Now we will end this roundtable. Once again, thank you for being today with us. Thank you for all the lectures and the panelists. I'm really honored to be here with such spectacular women representing Brics. And now our next panel will be about consulate representatives. It will start in about 5 to 6 minutes. So you have time to grab a coffee and come back and stay tuned, because we have a long day today with lots of information and a lot of very interesting insights. Once again, thank you very much